Hello, my horde. So, originally, I filmed an off-the-cuff version of this video, but since the footage was, horrible, I took the time to try to sculpt my scattered thoughts into a script and do a take two. So here we are. When I first found out that the Hunger Games prequel was about President Snow, I immediately decided I had no interest in reading it. But then the movie was coming out, which I have not seen at the time of filming this video, and I was in Target and I saw the book and I just said, well, fine, I'll give it a chance. But to put it short, I didn't really like the book. I'm going to explain why in perhaps excessive detail, but that is the tone of this review. I'm not going to run the plot down in chronological order, but rather just hit some discussion points with lots of spoilers, so here's your warning for that. I'm going to be upfront about the fact that I had a very specific notion about what I would be interested in from further Hunger Games novels, and this just isn't interested in being that. So what I personally would have been more interested in is world building. I was always intrigued by what the game makers' lives must be like, especially given that under Snow, if you fail, you end up executed. And the sci-fi nerd in me really, wants to know a lot more about how and why the mutts are engineered and why any of it is even being researched to begin with. And while, some of those things are touched upon in the book, but because the book is fundamentally a character study, it isn't concerned with expanding the lore, so to speak. And we'll dive back into those specific topics in a moment, but let's take it from broader complaints, then down to my nitpicky ranting. I really didn't think people were clamoring to know more about Snow, but maybe I just wasn't seeing those posts or whatever. It just seems like a really bizarre choice, because why should we care? And after reading the book, I still super don't, and he's actively actually a less interesting character to me now. I don't believe the intention was to humanize Snow, and it definitely wasn't done, in my opinion. The book gives us a glimpse of the fact that Snow was a traumatized child during the war, but it isn't, doing so in a way that garners sympathy for Snow or even gives us a greater understanding of the war between the capital and the districts. The greatest failing of the book, perhaps, is that Snow has no actual character arc. In all the time that he is pushed towards becoming perhaps a more empathetic person, he's never particularly tempted to do so, which we know, of course, because we know what he is like at the end of his life. But if he had perhaps been an actually kind and caring kid who was turned into the monster we know in the original series, then he would have undergone real change during the course of the book. However, Snow is never presented as anything other than selfish, lacking in emotion, and having a notion of entitlement to power. Even his relationship to Lucy Gray is predicated on this feeling of ownership, and he never internally seems to truly love her. Yes, I believe he was horny for her, but the fact that he spends not 1 second on sadness or remorse when he decides to try to kill her makes it not some tortured character moment, but instead just a natural continuation of how there is no life he values but his own. Now, perhaps the idea here is that Snow is in contrast to Katniss, while Katniss and Snow both do what they think they need to do in order to survive. Snow never has anyone else that he cares about so deeply that they are necessary to the survival plan above himself, which is something Katniss does for her loved ones. Like, she wants to survive, but more, she wants them to survive. And I think that people will probably talk about Snow caring for Tigress and the Grandmam, but the book didn't really make me feel like he actually loved them either. Just had like a better sense of loyalty to them. He respects, but doesn't necessarily like his grandmother. And though he and Tigress are close, I think it's largely her shouldering the relationship, since everything she does is to help Snow advance in life. And he really does very little to make her life better. But truly, my biggest problem with the book being about Snow is the incredibly ham-fisted way it makes Snow the center of the fucking universe. I have no idea if this is the book Suzanne Collins wanted to write, or if she was perhaps pressured to write this. But she is a better writer than this. This book finds a way to make every little detail about Katniss a highly personal attack on Snow. Katniss being a winner from District 12 when Snow was romantically involved with a winner from District 12. Snow getting punished for cheating as a mentor in the games by being sent to be a peacekeeper in District 12. And when he encounters the Mockingjays, he immediately has this unreasonable, deep hatred of them. Lucy Gray pointing out a plant she knows as Katniss to him. Snow being the whole reason gifts can be sent to the arena. Lucy Gray singing and maybe having even written the Hanging Tree song. It is perhaps a personal pet peeve of mine, but I absolutely hate when prequels or sequels are written in such a way that, like, they sort of warp the original story to make the original main character now in service to someone else's story. Snow hates Mockingjays, so now the really great imagery of this persistence of life surviving and adapting after being abandoned is really just this personal fuck you to this one guy. How did they know to pick the one bird Snow despises as a symbol of the fucking rebellion? Like, what? Snow never needed to be more than what he was in the Hunger Games. We didn't need to know for sure that he poisoned people, or know that he had some part in shaping the games as we saw them. Snow was a person who was just representing systemic ideas. But if we were going to make Snow part of the engineering of the modern Hunger Games, why the fuck isn't that what this book is about? Like, his time as an apprentice game maker and his rise to the presidency would have been much more interesting to me. Look, when I first heard Hunger Games Prequel, I kind of thought, oh, I hope this is about the head game maker of the 74th games, a character whose name I haven't bothered to remember, but whose life surely must have been interesting, and would have given the opportunity to build a better picture of how the Capitol operates and where all the crazy tech comes from. And truly, you could build a classical tragedy out of knowing Snow definitely kills that dude. But maybe aside from the monstrosity of the games, maybe he's, you know, a loving husband and a father, or he's a workaholic who comes to regret not taking the time for love or family, or maybe he only became a game maker because he has a sick mother whose medical bills he's been paying ever since he could work. And Snow's story certainly could have fit the archetype I was hoping for if this book had followed more of his later life and perhaps left in a few flashbacks to Lucy Gray instead. He could be thinking of her fondly throughout the book, and when he finally ascends to the presidency, well, that's when we find out that he tried to kill her. And maybe even now he fears that she's alive. She's plotting against him somehow. That actually is the way I would rewrite this. It'll be my personal fanfiction. If I'm being very honest, though, the reason why I am so insistent that the book should have been about a game maker is the simple fact that we've got no fucking answers about the evolution of technology in Panem. Like, fuck, we don't even know if there are other countries in the world. Lucy Gray talks about the Covey having been able to go outside of Panem before the war, but Snow thinks there is no world outside of Panem. So when they're planning to run away, Snow thinks it's not that they will ever find another civilization, but that they'll just be living in caves. Just mentioning the idea of other places, but not having Lucy Gray speak of anywhere specific, leaves us continuing to ask the question, where the fuck is the rest of the world while Panem is killing children? I mean, they're probably online making useless videos like this one while ignoring all the war and violence in the world, much as I am right now. So maybe other countries not interfering is in fact the most realistic part of the book. I don't know how to transition away out of like suddenly grappling with how useless I feel against the bad things happening in the world, but I have a bunch more totally unimportant stuff to nitpick about, so here we go. After Clemencia gets bit by the snakes, Snow ends up seeing several human-animal hybrid test subjects, and while it's clearly a moment you're supposed to remember the dogs from the 74th games that had the other tributes' eyes, it still doesn't quite answer if they were literally the eyes of the dead tributes, or if those dogs had somehow been engineered the moment the tributes were selected, and there may in fact have also been Katniss and PETA dogs too at some point. But I do think it's meant to be connected, and yet there is not one single explanation of why the fuck is that lady doing that. The only answer seems to be because she's crazy and cruel, but even the most outlandish ideas come from somewhere, yeah? Is it just trying to see if humans could fly if we fuse them with macaws? Perhaps she thinks if she can make a soldier fused with a dog, they'll be more obedient. The Hunger Games is a pretty solidly sci-fi series that mostly has advanced science that seems plausible-ish. You know, even if those dogs are sort of are they, aren't they enough that it's got some wiggle room for like not even being true that they fully have human eyes. And then this book happens, and there are snakes that I guess inject you with snake virus so that you grow scales on your body. And worst of all, we find out the Jabberjays were controlled by remote. They are organic creatures, but are controlled by a remote and have modes. And I just have to take a leap in logic and assume that the remote puts out some kind of sonic frequencies that only the Jabberjays can hear, because how it works is never explained to Snow. Just that he can press a button for record, play, and neutral. Like, stupid me for assuming that the Jabberjays were just very well trained and had longer memories and more complex intelligence than other birds that mimic speech. Nope, they're little organic robots that are perfectly normal birds until you press a button on a remote. I know that I should just suspend my disbelief and realize that it doesn't matter how it works, but it does. It really matters so very much to me. What is the range on the remote? If the record and playback functions are the only functions important enough to be talked about in the book, how did they get the birds into the right places? How did they get the fucking birds back? Because in the book, they're like, oh yeah, we put these things on neutral and put them in the wild because they were useless to us, but now that we have decided to take them back, we're going to have to set a whole bunch of traps that it turns out the Mockingjays are too smart to go into, and some of the Jabberjays resist too. But shouldn't they have a recall button if we can also press a button to make them say whatever they heard when they were in record mode? Like, Why would you not organic programming that into the birds while you're at it? These birds were military spy gear, and not wanting the other side to have your tech is like a pretty big deal. I mean, I guess the Capitol was confident that the districts didn't have the resources to figure out how they engineered the birds, and it seems that was either true or they had no interest in it. But what a flaw not having an easy retrieval system would have been, you know, when the birds were still useful. After Clementia gets bit by the snakes, Snow ends up seeing several human-animal hybrid test subjects, and while it's clearly a moment you're supposed to remember the dogs from the 74th games, it still doesn't quite answer if they were literally the eyes of the dead tributes, or if those dogs had somehow been engineered the moment the tributes were selected, and there may have in fact been Katniss and PETA dogs too at some point. And also, a question that is never answered is a single explanation of why the fuck is that lady doing that? Like, other than the cruelty is the point, and that's all well and good to represent, but some kind of logic does exist, and I need to know it, damn it. Like, especially because these experiments are government funded, so I need to know why the government thinks the research will be useful. I mean, the birds didn't work out in the long term. What convinced them to let this lady do the hybrids and the snakes? Is it just trying to see if humans could fly if we fuse them with macaws? Maybe she thinks if she can make a soldier fuse with a dog, it'll be more obedient. I just mean, if this lady is the inventor of the games, then her story would be more interesting. I'm just saying, if we were gonna make a book that was about, like, a homicidal maniac of a person, this lady, this game maker lady, whose name I didn't bother to remember from the book, she was it. It was her. Not Snow, her. That's just my opinion. But alas, here we are. Not only were my original questions about the world of the Hunger Games novels not answered, I have 5,000 more, and the idea of a sequel to this prequel makes me want to gag. However, if it happens, I am probably going to feel compelled to read it anyway against my saner wishes. I have no illusions that anything I said in this video makes much sense, but I get a certain way about things and they just won't leave my head. I will be ranting on about this book 3 years from now, and I am not joking. One thing that did come from the few little bits of research I had to do to knock some things loose in my brain for this video was that Suzanne Collins wrote the Gregor the Overlander series, which I never read, but vaguely remember hearing about in middle school, and it sounded kind of weird, so sound off in the comments if you think I should read those. That is finally all I have for you today. If you enjoy watching me work myself up over young adult novels, well, boy howdy, you can hit subscribe and there's like a 10% chance I'll actually show up in your subscription feed. And I will see you treasures next time.